peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losan, father and sons, together with your lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the victorious one's teachings and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this, I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, may the smell of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. So that was Rinpoche. That's what we're hoping for. That's what we're praying for sure. So, so anybody have anything to say about Lama Zopa's? Do they know how many people got to know him or had any experience with him?
Only through his recorded teachings online in Zoom.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll say some things about him because I think that's we can include some of the things that we're talking about because this class is how to be your own therapist. So talking about the passing of Lama Zopa and how that's going to affect everybody and the organization and individual minds of students. Excuse me. So I'll give you a little context. I had a kind of a special relationship with him, which I think I'm very grateful to have had that. I can say this now because it's not a HIPAA violation. But he was, when, he knew I was a physician, a primary care doctor, and take care of a lot of people with diabetes and hypertension and all that. And, but anyway, going back to when I first met him, I'll come back to that. But I was when he was in this country, and actually when he was traveling for at least 10 years, I was calling the shots for his medications, and Venerable Roger and I would stay in touch, and labs would come flowing in, and I would try to make recommendations that I thought were reasonable. And sometimes Rinpoche would do what I said, and sometimes he'd do what he wanted to do. He had his own, he had his own plans, I guess. But in any case, it's interesting being a student, having your guru as a patient, and then him not following your advice. Yeah.
Go ahead and
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Michael, he's a physician as well.
Oh, is that right? Okay. I didn't know that. What kind of physician are you?
I did a med peds residency and then a toxicology fellowship, and now I primarily practice addiction medicine, primary care and addiction medicine.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I think I probably had a opportunity to be with Rinpoche. My relationship goes back to 1978, and when I was at a Copan course many years ago, and I remember, I was like one of 200 people there, and they were all Westerners. There were very few Asians there at that time. Most of them were hippies. They'd gone to Nepal to get the cheap drugs, and hang out in Kathmandu because it's a cool place. And so there were people from all over the world, mostly from I'd say Australia, New Zealand, and quite a few Americans and Europeans. That was it. That was the vast majority of people. And we, the teachings were outside. They called it a tent, but it was basically a shelter with a tin roof that you could squish 200 people in, like sitting like this, literally. And they turned it into a gompa. So they put grass mats on the ground, and there was some cushions you could sit on there. But anyway, when I first met Rinpoche, I remember he was like 31 or 2 years old. He was skinny as a rail, and he walked in, and I didn't have any idea who he was. And they treated him like he was like a god, like a demigod. It was so, it was such respect. So I quickly honed in that this is not an ordinary being, and I remember wanting to. I listened to the teachings. I took notes. I was a Presbyterian at the time. Had no intention of becoming a Buddhist. And in my diary, I wrote, "I will not become a Buddhist. I'm just here to get what I get. Learn how to contain my mind." But over the course of the 1 month November class, the November, what they call it, for years and years, this course still runs. It's called the November course, and it's probably the most powerful course that they do at Copan, and it's the source of a lot of the FPMT Center students leave that course and are inspired and want to go. They want to keep the Dharma alive, and they want to share it with other people. That's kind of what happened to me. But while I was there, I decided, well, I have to go and interview these guys, because Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa. Lama Zopa was there for the whole course from day one. About 2 weeks into it, Lama Yeshe came, and then there was like this buzz, like, "Oh, Lama Yeshe's coming." Everybody got excited, and and Lama Yeshe was the charismatic good cop, and Lama Zopa was the very traditional bad cop, good cop, bad cop. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all, but Rinpoche was very traditional, and Lama Yeshe was very freeform, and had a great sense of humor, and just people loved both Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe. And I remember hearing about Lama Zopa Rinpoche the first time, and how he never laid down. This was back, and this went on for years, decades, in fact. He would not lay down. He would always be sitting up, even when they said he didn't sleep, and you got to sleep, but I guess you can do dream yoga or some sort of deep, sort of restful state where your body can regenerate itself, and things can get rebooted mentally and physically. But again, he never laid down. I remember he went on. We were on a train ride. We were going from trying to get from Kathmandu down through India to Bodh Gaya, and some people that had ridden in the on the train and were actually on the same sleeper car with Rinpoche, said he was always sitting up doing prayers all hours of the night. And he, I remember the last time I saw him in person, Robbie Watkins and I, he's my business partner. He's a family doctor also. He and I hadn't seen Rinpoche in a couple of years, and I wanted to just go check in with Roger and see which medicines he was taking and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, and he was, he looked good. I mean, things were, he looked like he was in pretty good shape. And, you know, he's always teasing me. And we had a good relationship, a good friendship, and somebody that I've always considered Rinpoche and His Holiness and Lama Yeshe as sort of be one and the same in terms of their in other words, how much they benefited me and how I viewed them. I viewed them all equally as Buddhists to the degree that I'm able to have a pure view. But in any case, Rinpoche is, like I said, I mentioned the last time that Robbie and I went to his house, and he was in Aptos, California, which is just, I guess you'd say, south of Santa Cruz. And they've got a beautiful house up there. A lot of monks and nuns as well were doing like nonstop practices up there, and the house is beautifully decorated. You know, with tonkas and all kinds of stuff like that. And yeah, it was amazing experience to be around Rinpoche and his attendants. And this was after the stroke. It's only a couple of years ago. And he was in his mid-70s at the time. And he was up all night long. Nobody could keep up with him. These younger monks, they'd have to sleep in, they'd rest up, but somebody had to be available, because it could be 2 or 3 in the morning when Rinpoche would be doing prayers for some students or somebody who was sick in Singapore or, anywhere in the world. Whenever people would ask him to do stuff, I don't know exactly the process, but I know he practiced day and night, for the 46 years I've known him, he's like the epitome of pure morality, and skillful means. And I mean, that's all I can say. It's just I got I got used to him. In fact, I may have gotten this this throat clearing thing from him, but mine's related to my allergies. But yeah, he was a force in the world of Tibetan Buddhism, and just a great example of someone totally committed to the welfare of other people or beings in general. I was, Robbie and I were joking at the end of our class today at the center. We were talking and said Rinpoche might be going like to Milarepa. This happened many years ago up in Vermont, and he was heading there that way, but the car went by this huge lake, and Rinpoche had him pull off, and he got out of the car, and he sat there for like an hour or more doing prayers for the fish in the lake. So, not your average guy, right? Always always mindful of the preciousness of life, and just like I said, amazing. I got a Christmas card from him. Excuse me. The FPMT used to send Christmas cards out to everybody, but I guess there's so many people now. But the Christmas card, he used to try to sign most of them too, but what was written in it was printed in there. But it was his bless. It was what he said, and it says Merry Christmas. And you open the card and it says, "May you have a peaceful and happy death." So when of course, to be able to die with a peaceful, happy mind, you have to live an extraordinary life. It takes somebody who's really disciplined their mind and had their attitude. Their attitude has to be unbelievable to be able to do that. So that's Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I mean, he just constantly thinking of others, praying for his students, going the extra mile, and I could just another quick story. I remember I had been this was at Vajrapani, and he was teaching there, and I was out. They have a beautiful stupa. If you know where Vajrapani is, it's north of Santa Cruz in a place called Boulder Creek. It's actually outside Boulder Creek. It's out in the redwood forest. It's quite a beautiful place. It's actually where Lama Yeshe was cremated. But anyway, Rinpoche was giving some teachings at Vajrapani, and I was up walking around the stupa, and I was thinking of something about to ask Rinpoche, and because I had set up a time to meet with him briefly to ask him a question about my practice, and when I got to, but there was something else I wanted to ask him, and so when I got in to talk to him and ask him the question about my practice, as I was getting ready to leave, he said, "Wasn't there something else you wanted to ask me?" And there are lots of stories like that of where he could, and to be a Buddha, to really be able to help your students, you need to be able to know their minds. And I believe in, so many stories. And I had these experiences multiple times, not just once, but multiple times, where I knew he by what he said, he knew my mind. That's why I was really careful when I was around him, what I was thinking. So, gosh, I don't want anything. I don't want too much bad stuff in my mind when I'm particularly around him. So it's a great loss for our organization, but for there, literally maybe millions, but certainly thousands and thousands of students who are very sad today. And I mean, this last several days with the loss of Rinpoche, but they're going to embalm his body, and they'll keep it there at Kopan, as it'll be a reason to go there, literally, on pilgrimage, just to see his holy body. So I'm actually glad they didn't cremate him, which they did. Lama Yeshe, when he passed, they cremated him. I was there for that. That was back in 1983. I went to Vajrapani for that. But anyway, anybody else have any thoughts about, this? Oh, by the way, when they asked me to give this little talk today at the center. And as I was driving over there, I said, I wonder if I'll get emotional. And when I got, and as soon as I came in and sat down. It was right at 10:30 when we started. And so somebody says, Don Brown here. Would you like to get up and share some of your something about Lama Zopa Rinpoche? And I just, when I stood up and I looked around the center, I mean, everything I saw was something that he had asked me to do or us to do as a center. You know, yeah, I can remember we had a Buddhist statue that I bought in the very early days. This was in 1991. It was actually before we got the name Kadampa Center. But we were trying to get our center, the space that we were trying to get the holy objects there. We had bought Lama Tsongkhapa and his two disciples, and then we bought a guy, they were somebody in New Delhi was making a lot of these really big Shakyamuni Buddha statues, perfect quality, amazing quality, and selling them to FPMT centers for very, very little money relative to what they would cost otherwise. And so we had that statue, and we got all the mantras and stuff from monastery. I think Kopan, we gave them a donation, and they sent us all the things that would, blood that go inside of the statues before they're consecrated. And as we were sitting outside, Lama Zopa was there and Geshe Soga was there. And this is 1993 at this time. And we were outside eating lunch and they were still inside doing the consecration. And we looked up a woman named Kathy Leb. She looked up in the sky and she said, and it wasn't raining. It hadn't been raining. It didn't even look like rain. There were a few really high clouds up there, but that didn't. And she said, look, there's a rainbow right above the center. And there was. It was kind of one of those, kind of like a woo-woo moment. But that's kind of the story of, a lot of things like that happened around Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And then he asked us, I think maybe at that time we asked him, okay, how can we best, help the center grow and help preserve the Buddha Dharma? And he said, get a Kala Chakra statue. And okay, how do you do that? And he pointed to this column that was 8 foot tall, and he said, and it needs to be about that tall. Well, that didn't happen, but the Kala Chakra statue did. We found an artist in Kathmandu who could do this kind of work, and it took a couple of years to get him to get started, and a couple of years once he started it to finish it. I remember I made like 3 or 4 trips back forth to Kathmandu for not just for that, but that was a big part of my trip, was just checking on the status of our Kala Chakra statues, and that they got delivered around year 1998 or 99. Then we asked Lama Zopa again, what can we do to he was one of those people who, if you ask him, he's going to put you to work. So then he said, well, he said, you need a Kadampa stupa. You need a Kadampa stupa. Now they built one at Vajrayogini Institute, but that was a different style than the ones that you see in Nepal. And I like the ones, and we wanted one that would, be painted and so forth. So we got pictures of the ones that are outside of Swambhu, which is there's a huge stupa there in Kathmandu called Swambhu, and there's a lot of Kadampa stupas there. So we got some ideas from that. And we got an artist after the Kala Chakra stupa was built in Boston. Nick Rubush said, "Hey, we got a couple of artists, and they're not ready to go back to, to Kathmandu. They actually want to stay in this country." And John Paul, the one that came to us, couldn't speak a word of English. Nick never told me that. But anyway, thanks to John Paul and some other hardworking people, we were able to build a really beautiful Kala Chakra stupa, which is about, 20 feet high. It's just gorgeous. It's very inspirational. And in fact, I just went there tonight to do a few laps and prayers, and then we asked him again. I don't know if any of you got to come. I guess you did come to Black Mountain in Western North Carolina, where we held the lamp of the path, light of the path to enlightenment. Geshe-la, Rinpoche came like 4 times, to teach that. And that was students from all over the world were invited, and they came. And then it was broadcast and so forth. And while we were there, Robbie and I went and asked him, "Is there anything else you think you can think of, Geshe-la, Rinpoche, that would be good for our center, to help us, be successful in transmitting the Dharma and keeping it alive?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I can think of, you need a statue of a Tisha." And then again, it was about 5 feet tall, seated and about 5 feet tall. He pointed to the wall about how big he wanted it. And that's another project that took about 5 to 7 years, but it finally happened. We got that happened within the last year or two. So over the years, we've tried to fulfill Rinpoche's wishes. And meantime, I believe it has been good for our center, for the karma of our center, the collective karma of our center, to have a close relationship with Rinpoche and the organization. So that was, he was, he was. If I ever ask him a question about how, I knew to expect. Something was going to come out of it that was going to put me to work, and I'm grateful for that. So anyway, he had some health issues, and but I hadn't seen him in a couple of years, and I think he had a great doctor in Kathmandu, from what I could tell. A Nepali physician who did a really good job. Rinpoche had diabetes for, 30 years, maybe not quite 30 years, but a long time. And plus hypertension that had not been well controlled for a long time. That's thus leading to the stroke that he had, or at least him, I guess, to say it right, he manifested the aspect of having had a stroke. But in any case, his health was not best, but he persevered. He had incredible energy no matter what was going on. And when I looked at the altitude of this Khumbu Valley where he was when he had altitude sickness, and there's a monastery there, and it was at 7,100 meters. And I think that's where he went, but I'm not sure. but I know that he was in the Himalayas, and he must have been pretty close to being over 7,000 meters, which that's like 20,000 feet. That's more than 20,000 feet. So if you go from the Kathmandu Valley, which was about the same, it's about like Denver. Kathmandu is at the same altitude as Denver, up to 20,000 feet, and you do it quickly. And I think they did. It was not surprising that he had altitude sickness. I don't know. I don't know the details, but it was, and then I suspect they flew him down. They got a helicopter to come and bring him back to the city, and the rest is history. But I don't know the details. Yeah. Any comments or questions?
In terms of doing a regular death meditation, do you have a recommendation?
A death meditation. Yeah. Yeah, I do actually. This is one, there are three principles of the path, right? There's renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. And when you develop renunciation, this is actually in the, I think the foundation of all good qualities is a couple of stanzas in there on how to develop renunciation. And the first thing to meditate on is precious human rebirth. And remembering the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. Those things, just like our life is so precious because we can use it to get enlightened. The second aspect of developing renunciation, the second meditation, is on death and impermanence. And the traditional way to meditate on this, and we're talking about, when we're talking about impermanence in Buddhism, we're talking about subtle impermanence, like moment to moment to moment, as our mind and body go through space. Right now, as we're sitting here, we're aging, right? We're spending our karmic seeds, and soon the bank account will be broke, and our life will be over. So the traditional way to meditate on this is to first to meditate on that death is definite. And so bring to mind all the historical figures that have died, and that everybody has to die. Intellectually, we know this, but in our heart of hearts, we have this sense of permanence. We have this sense of, well, it's not going to happen to me, but we know it will, but we don't. There's a part of us that resists even thinking about it. And it's part of ignorance. It's just a mistaken perception of self. But anyway, this first aspect to meditate on death is to meditate on the certainty of death. The death is definite. And again, the 3 or 4 reflections that you can do, not only remembering that everybody dies and it's going to happen to you, and also to think about how short our lives are and how little time we use in our life doing spiritual practice. It's such a tiny, tiny amount of time in our life that we actually, in the course of a day, we might do, you might stretch it out to 30 minutes to an hour, maybe, and minutes, sometimes not at all. So there's very little time. So when we meditate on death is definite, the conclusion is that I must practice the Dharma, because I'm going to die. I have this potential, Buddha potential, I must practice the Dharma. The second contemplation is that the time of death is totally indefinite. There's no, it could happen at any moment. And, just with each tick of the clock, it could happen any moment. And then and some of the contemplations that you might do to help solidify or strengthen that notion that it could happen at any moment is we look at all the different things that we have in our lives that are meant to support our health and well-being that actually can become the source of our demise. Food, a lot of people, eat food, but then sometimes they get food that's poisoned, toxic, right? We have cars, and we have, but people die every day in car accidents, and we have medicines that are supposed to help us, but often people die from problems with the medications, and so on. So there's so many things that can take our lives and could happen at any moment. And so the conclusion at this point is, because death can happen at any moment, is I must practice the Dharma, conclusion of the first contemplation, and I must do it now. I mustn't delay. I must practice the Dharma now. And then the last contemplation is that the only currency that we can spend on our deathbed are the spiritual imprints that we place on our mind stream through the practice of Dharma. That's as we're it's the only thing of any benefit at the time of death, are the dharmic, positive karmic imprints that we put on our mind. Is our death going to be, are we going to be freaking out? And is our mind going to be full of regret? Or are we going to have a peaceful death? And actually maybe even a death that's something like, it's possible. Certainly Rinpoche, when they talk about he's still in his meditation, they're talking about the clear light meditation that a lot of great lamas have been able to achieve enlightenment at the time of death. It's something, I don't anticipate I'll be able to do it, but it's something that would be wonderful to be able to do. But the top, to be able to die, like thinking of my teachers, thinking of others, bringing to mind thoughts of compassion, like practicing Tonglen, imagining that any fear or regret that I might be experiencing, there must be another, billions of people or millions and millions of people dying at this very moment on this planet, having the same experience I am. And may I take their suffering into my heart. And may I take their negativity into my heart, destroy my selfishness, and may they have, and imagine that I'm giving them a peaceful death, and actually be able to practice Tonglen at the time of your death would be extraordinary. So again, the meditation is the only thing of any benefit at the time of death is are the imprints from our Dharma practice. And the conclusion of that contemplation is I must practice the Dharma now, and I must practice it purely. I must practice it purely. So that's the sort of the classic meditation and the conclusions. I'll go over it again. So death is definite, and the conclusion is I must practice the Dharma. The time of death is indefinite, could happen any moment. I must practice the Dharma now, this very moment. And the only thing of any benefit at the time of death are the dharmic imprints, the good karma, the virtuous meritorious karma that we've planted on our mind stream. So the conclusion there is, I must practice the Dharma now and practice it purely. Pure Dharma, not made up Dharma, not second-rate Dharma, but Dharma that's been passed down in an unbroken lineage, from the time of the Buddha to the present day. And obviously that's how we feel like the teachings that we listen to from our teachers and stuff, like, as come down in an unbroken lineage from the Buddha to the present day. And that's what makes the teachings so powerful. And it's interesting that they'll talk about this unbroken lineage, but it's 1,000 years from now, the Dharma may not be alive, you might say. Nobody will be practicing. The books might be here, but the Dharma dies when it only exists on paper, when it's not when the realizations haven't been generated in the minds of the lineage holders and then passed on to the next generation and the next generation, next generation. So it's like that. So again, there are other ways to meditate on death. One of the ways that we used to, I remember I meditated on it. I haven't done this for a long time, but would be to imagine that you're on death row and you're going to where you're going to be hung or electrocuted or whatever, and they come and get you and they put the handcuffs on and they put you in the vehicle, and as the car gets closer and closer to the hangman's noose, you might say, you get closer and closer to the moment of death, and you try to be aware of that, and even right up to the moment when maybe the noose goes around your neck, and you try to think about, well, what's important, to make it real. I heard another example which I really find useful recently about, you could call it a death meditation, but it was the example is like, we come into this life with I don't think I mentioned this last week. If I did, I apologize. But we come into this life with this we might say a big bag of money, right? And the money, all those, whatever that, maybe it's coins, paper money, whatever it is, but the money symbolizes precious seconds of our lives. And we're spending money right now. As every breath we take, we're using that money that we, from our back, right? From our chest, of precious seconds. Every second is like money. And when the money's gone, the life is over. And we don't know. We don't know how much is left in the bag or in the chest or in our karmic. How much, we don't know when the karma for our demise will ripen. And so having that awareness that, when we're sitting around maybe mindlessly watching television or maybe feeling sorry for ourselves, that's costing us precious moments of our lives that we could actually potentially be using to cultivate Dharma realizations, to bring to mind the Dharma. So those are some. Does anybody else have any death meditations that they have tried that have been beneficial?
There is one, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but you imagine, you go through the different systems of your body, and you imagine that they are degenerating, and how that works. Your brain, your eyes, your skin, your heart, your intestinal tract, and you imagine how that gets done. I've even seen it done in forms, in the form of that then being fed off like they do in Nepal or Tibet, where they cut up the bodies and feed it to the vultures.
Yeah. I never saw a sky burial. I've seen images of it, of course. I think many people have. The charnel grounds, where there was always somebody. I mean, let's be honest, the ground was hard as brick, right? It was frozen. So you can't bury people 6 feet underground. And so they had, basically the mortician was a guy who would chop the bodies up, and even the bones would be crushed and mixed with whatever else there was, so that the birds, the vultures, could eat it. I remember in Thailand, in particular, if you've ever been to a monastery in Thailand, and this is not just one, it's like every monastery in Thailand has up, that I've been to anyway, up near the front of it is a skeleton. Okay. And it's in a glass, usually in a glass case. And there's a picture of that person. And usually it's not an old person. There's a picture of that person in life, maybe with their family, doing, there's several pictures of that person in their life, and you're looking at their skeleton. And, the message there is that, hey, this is going to happen to you. This was a person just like you. And someday you're going to be basically like this person. You're going to be dead. And maybe they'll use your skeleton. I had a friend's mother. She died last year, I think, and she gave her body to the medical students at Duke University. I believe it was Duke, but anyway, to one of the local medical schools, to be dissected. So yeah, so there's that, and then there's one more example. Yeah, I do remember in Thailand, in particular, when they cremated the bodies, it was a celebration. They would take the bodies and basically they would build this big fire, plenty of wood in Thailand, right? So they would build a big fire, and the body would be placed on the fire. And as the fire was burning, they were serving food, and they were having basically a celebration of that person's life. But it was not a heavy thing at all. It was had a celebratory kind of feeling about it. I never experienced it, but I heard people talk about it. I thought that was kind of cool. Very like a cool way to celebrate somebody's life, and that was the way they did it. So yeah, getting back to the generating renunciation. So the first two meditations, the first one was on precious human rebirth, And the second was on death and impermanence. That's to turn your mind away from just the happiness of this life. And then the second two meditations, one's on karma, and then the other's on dukkha, or suffering. And that's, because we're 24/7, our actions are motivated by self-centeredness. Therefore, we're creating the future causes just to stay in samsara and suffer more and more. So we have to turn our mind away from the happiness of future lives as well. So that's sort of, this determination to be free is how renunciation is defined. But it really is having compassion for yourself, for oneself, and making a determination to not just, give in to all of life's problems and stuff, but to be free of suffering, to achieve nirvana would be great. All right, one quick story from Thailand that was very, very powerful for me, and interesting at the same time. There was one monk, I had met him in Bodh Gaya 5 or 6 years ago, before I was in Thailand at this time. And he was Japanese, ethnically Japanese, but spoke perfect English. And he had become a Thai Buddhist monk, and he lived in that. There's a monastery there that caters pretty much to the Westerners who want to become monks. It's called Wat Pananachat, I think is the name of it. And he had just completed a 3-year retreat. And he had basically, everybody meditates or lives in these little huts. They call them kutis. I guess it's almost like Kootie. But anyway, these little huts. I mean, I had my own, when I was there, I stayed in a kuti. I had by myself. But he was in a kuti, and they put a tent over his kuti so he couldn't see out. So basically, there was no sensory input for 3 years. They bring his food to him, but, he didn't, and it's hot in Thailand, even though this was northern Thailand, it was still pretty warm. And when he had just been out of retreat for a little while, when I was eating lunch, and I asked him, I said, what was your biggest take home from that long retreat that you completed? And he thought for a moment, and he said, impermanence. Impermanence. That's it. And we think of all of our negative mind states are impermanent. If we just sit with it, the anger, the attachment, the fear, the stress, we just are able to sit with our experience and embrace it in some way and just be with it. It passes. And he had to do that for a long time, for 3 years. And that's the principle, that's their principal practice, really. And he said, if you get impermanence, you get the other 3 things. When you do, talking about Vipassana meditation, there's dukkha, impermanence, and no self. And he said, if you get impermanence, you get dukkha and you get no self. Because there's no point where you can say, okay, at any moment in time, there's the I, because it's always changing. It's always in a state of flux, the mind and the body. But here we're talking about the sense of I is never, you can't find it. In the moment that you say, there it is, it's already changed. And so there is no self that exists that way. There's no concrete, permanent, inherently existent self. It's just this flux, call our mental continuum, this constant state of flux. So thank you for that question. That was a good it was a good question, and something that's relevant right now, that particularly the subject of impermanence for all of us. So, well, let's do our dedication verses so we can wrap it up. It's 8:01. Let's see, Michael, do you have those verses? I guess the Shanti Dev, I don't know which, I can't remember what verses we use. Maybe it's KYDE. Are you there?
Give me 1 second, I'll pull them up.
You know, the Shanti Deva's dedications, another one that's one we use a lot at our center. So while you're doing that, is there any particular subject that for next week that we can start thinking about now over the week that you'd be interested in exploring in the world of I guess it could be anything. That's the beauty of this, how to be your own therapist. It's the Dharma.
I don't have any, but I will email you some if I think of.
All right. Well, I think, we want to talk this week. I was going to talk a little bit about love and attachment and things like that. But I think next week I'd like to talk about the 8 worldly concerns. Is that so much? You sometimes it's called the 8 worldly dharmas. You familiar with that term or that list?
That would be great.
Are you familiar with that? Well, anyway, we'll talk about that next week. I think that's where our mind is 99% of the time, is engaged in the 8 worldly concerns. So I think I'd like to talk about it because it really is revealing for me personally, just to explore, how my mind creates, just is completely crazy a lot of the time, chasing after these 8 worldly concerns. But we'll do the dedication of merit. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzagatso, the wish fulfilling and wish granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in the world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Okay, well, thank you for
Hian.
being.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, my pleasure, and it's a real, as I told Venerable Donder, it's such an honor to be asked to share these teachings, at least my spin on it, and it always learn a lot from these classes because I have to do a little bit of work. All right, well, you guys have a good week.
You too. Thank you so much, Dr. Brown.